Welcome to another creepy story, where reality and the unknown blur together. Tonight we dive into a tale that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. But beware, once you start, there's no turning back. If you enjoy spine-chilling stories like this, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notifications. That way, you'll never miss a terrifying story. Have a creepy experience of your own, drop it in the comments, and it might just become the next story, with your name featured. Now, let's get started. I'll never forget the day the ground gave back more than bones. Most of my work is routine, the kind of back-breaking labor that blisters your hands and stains your clothes until the smell of damp soil never leaves you. People think a gravedigger's job is just shovels and dirt, but it's about records, accuracy, respect. Every burial has paperwork, permits signed, names recorded, witnesses present. A grave isn't just a hole, it's a promise that someone rests there, and when a court orders an exhumation, it's my job to break that promise carefully. That morning was grey, the kind of quiet dawn where even the birds seemed to watch in silence. The cemetery sat on the edge of a small town, old stones leaning crooked like tired teeth, names fading under decades of weather. Families had buried their dead here for over a century. The order was simple and exhume, confirm identity, prepare for relocation closer to living relatives. On paper, routine. In practice, nothing about that day would stay routine. We started like always. The grounds crew marked the grave, checked the register, confirmed the map. The headstone matched the paperwork, down to the date carved in weathered stone, 1954. The court officer stood by with his clipboard, his photographer ready to document. We brought in the backhoe, shaved the top layers of soil, then switched to hand tools as the clay thickened. Every spade of dirt fell heavy, as if the earth itself resisted giving this one back. Hours passed before the steel edge of a shovel scraped concrete. The vault, old, but intact. We brushed it off, secured the straps, and lifted the lid with the crane. The coffin inside was stained dark, its wood swollen but unbroken. I expected the usual. Collapse, bones, the trace of clothing. But when we set it on timbers and brushed the dirt away, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The lid bore deep scratches, clustered in frantic arcs, gouges that hadn't come from roots or insects. These were desperate marks, clawed from the inside. The younger men exchanged uneasy looks. I kept my face steady, but my stomach knotted. We undid the clasps, rusted, corroded, but still holding. When we lifted the lid, the smell hit first damp, metallic embalming fluid long since bled into soil. Inside lay the skeleton, twisted unnaturally. The arms weren't folded across the chest like the funeral home would have arranged. They were bent upward, fingers curled toward the lid. The jaw was open, teeth bared in what looked like a scream, frozen in silence. No one spoke, not even the officer. His photographer clicked the flash again and again, but his hands trembled. I stared at those bones, at the claw marks etched in wood, and I knew what had happened. She hadn't been dead when they buried her. People today forget that premature burial was once a real fear. Back in the early 20th century, medicine wasn't as precise. A faint pulse, shallow breath. Coma doctors sometimes mistook it for death. The wealthy bought safety coffins, contraptions with bells or air tubes, in case they woke in the dark. But ordinary folks, they got a box and dirt. Looking at that coffin, there was no doubt in my mind she had woken in the grave, and no one heard her. The silence pressed heavy. Normally someone cracks a grim joke, gallows humor to cut through the weight, but not this time. We all felt it. The panic that must have filled those last hours, the horror of clawing in darkness with lungs burning. Each scrape weaker than the last until silence took her for good. I'd dug hundreds of graves, but never before had I seen death tell its story so plainly. We were supposed to reseal the coffin, but my eyes caught something else. Folded beneath her ribs, tucked as if hidden from the world, were scraps of paper. I lifted them with gloved hands. They weren't funeral cards or receipts, they were letters. Dozens of them, yellowed but still sealed. No stamps, no names, just words scrawled across the fronts. I'm sorry, forgive me. I never told you the truth. My breath caught. These weren't tokens of love. They were confessions, unfinished business, carried into the earth. The officer ordered them photographed, catalogued. The family, when told, claimed no knowledge. No one knew who the letters were meant for, or why they'd been buried with her. And maybe that's what unsettled me most, because the dead don't get to explain. They just leave questions rotting in the dark, waiting for a shovel to uncover them. We lowered the coffin back down, resealed the vault, covered the grave. To any passerby, it looked untouched. A headstone standing silent above, a name carved in stone, a date marking an end that wasn't an end at all. But I carried the truth with me. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing it, the scratch of nails against wood, the muffled cry of someone no one believed was still alive. I imagined her waking in darkness, realizing where she was, clawing until her fingers broke. I thought about the letters, those words never spoken in life, carried into the ground like secrets too heavy for daylight. Who were they written for? A lover, a child, herself? I'll never know. None of us will. But I do know this. Cemeteries aren't just about death. They're about stories the living never finished, mistakes that followed them underground. Every headstone is a promise that someone rests below, but sometimes the earth hides truths that don't rest at all. And once you've seen what I've seen, you understand when you open the ground, you don't just dig up bodies, you dig up history, regret, terror, and sometimes, you dig up a fight no one ever knew was happening. Even now, years later, whenever I walk past that section of the cemetery, I feel it. The silence pressing down, heavier than the soil we laid back. Her name etched in stone, the date carved for all to see, and beneath it, a coffin that never held peace. A coffin that told me death isn't always the end. Sometimes, it's the beginning of a story you wish had stayed buried. And I think about her hands clawing upward, her letters sealed tight against her bones, secrets meant for no living eyes. That's what haunts me most, that we buried not just a woman, but her unfinished truths, and the ground, unwilling to keep them quiet forever, made sure we heard her story. Because the hardest lesson I've learned as a gravedigger is this: not every coffin holds rest. Some hold screams, some hold secrets, and some hold a silence so loud you'll never forget it. And once you've opened the earth and seen that truth for yourself, you can never look at a cemetery the same way again. The cemetery was still when we arrived, the kind of heavy quiet that makes the back of your neck prickle. I've dug long enough to know the difference between ordinary silence and the kind that feels like it's watching you. The job was an exhumation, court-ordered, paperwork signed, everything checked twice. On paper, nothing unusual. Families move remains all the time, wanting their loved ones closer, wanting closure in ways the dead can't object to. But the earth has a way of reminding you, it keeps its own secrets. The headstone was worn, tilted from years of rain and frost. The name etched faintly, a woman laid down in 1938. The officer confirmed the register. The map matched, no mistakes. We brought in the backhoe, cut the first layers, then switched to spades once the clay grew heavy and stubborn. The soil fought us harder than usual, clinging wet to every blade of steel, as if it wanted her left where she was. When the vault came into view, I knew something was off. The concrete wasn't cracked with age like most. It was perfect, sealed tight as though it had been poured yesterday. We chained it, lifted slow, and set the slab aside. The coffin inside was clean, unnervingly so, wood dark but polished, metal trim free of rust. I've seen coffins collapse into splinters after only decades, but this one looked untouched, preserved in a way the ground should never allow. We set it on timbers, wiped the dirt from the lid, and the crew went still. The wood was cool beneath my gloves, almost damp, and the clasps shone like new. I forced them open, the officer's eyes fixed on me, his photographer ready. The lid lifted easy, too easy, and the smell that should have come rot embalming chemicals. Damp earth wasn't there. Inside was a body, but not the way you'd expect. She lay perfectly intact, skin pale but unbroken, her burial dress bright as though it had just been pressed, her hair dark and glossy, spread across the pillow, her lips faintly red. Not bones, not fragments, but a woman who looked like she had only just been placed there. We froze. I'd seen partial preservation before, rare cases where the soil and coffin create a strange chemistry. But not like this. Not total preservation, not perfection. The officer's face was pale, the photographer shaking as he clicked flash after flash. I leaned closer, breath tight in my throat. That's when I saw it. Her eyes, they weren't sunken or clouded. They were open, faintly glistening in the dim light, staring up at the lid as though she had never stopped watching. One of the younger men swore under his breath, stumbled back. I wanted to tell him it was a trick of chemicals, embalming fluids seeping through and halting decay. But the truth was, embalming in 1938 wouldn't have left her like this. Not after all this time. And when the light from the photographer's flash struck her face, her lips looked as though they'd twitched, the faintest suggestion of a smile. The officer ordered the body left untouched until the medical examiner could arrive. But the ground around us felt heavier, the silence deeper, and every man there swore they could hear it, the faintest whisper of breath, shallow, hidden beneath layers of soil and time. We resealed the coffin, lowered it back, covered the vault. The family was told it was an unusual case of preservation, a scientific curiosity, nothing more. But none of us believed it. For weeks afterward, I dreamed of her face, those eyes glistening in the dark, unblinking, waiting. I'd wake in the night with dirt under my nails, my lungs burning as though I'd clawed my way up from the ground myself. And when I pass that part of the cemetery now, I don't just see the headstone with its faded name. I feel her eyes beneath, watching, patient, waiting for another lid to open, waiting for someone to listen to the breath that science swore couldn't be there. Because the hardest truth I've ever learned is that the earth doesn't always give us backbones. Sometimes, it gives us back something that looks alive, something that never learned how to rest. And when you see that, you don't walk away the same. You carry it with you, every step, every breath, until the day you join them. That day, I stopped thinking of cemeteries as quiet. They're not quiet, they're listening. Most nights, digging is just digging. The soil pushes back, the shovel bites in, and hours blur together in sweat and silence. But every so often, the ground gives up something it shouldn't, and that's when the job stops being routine. That's when the job stays with you. The order came through like any other court-signed, family approved, relocation of remains. The woman had been in the ground since the late 1940s. Her children were gone, but her grandchildren wanted her moved closer to the city. On paper, simple work. I've done it hundreds of times. It was early, the sky heavy with rain, the cemetery still. The stones leaned tiredly, inscriptions blurred by decades. We marked the plot, checked it against the register. Everything lined up. The backhoe shaved away the top layers. Then we switched to spades, careful not to strike the vault. Each cut into the clay felt heavy, reluctant, like the earth didn't want her disturbed. When the vault came into view, my stomach tightened. The concrete was fractured, jagged at the edges, as if something had been pressing out from inside. We brushed the dirt away, chained the lid, and lifted it with the crane. The coffin inside was swollen, wood warped and dark, its metal trim corroded. That part was expected. What wasn't expected was the sound. As we set it down on timbers, a faint rattle echoed inside. Not the collapse of wood, not the scatter of bone, but something sharp, deliberate, like fingernails skittering against wood. The younger man beside me froze. I told him it was just shifting debris, though my own throat was dry when I said it. We opened the clasps. They creaked, reluctant, and the lid gave way under our hands. The smell rose first, thick and sour, the rot of decades mixed with embalming chemicals. I've smelled it 100 times, but never this strong, never this sharp. Inside lay bones, the skeleton partially intact, clothed in what remained of burial fabric. But that wasn't what made us step back. The coffin was lined with scratches. Not a few, not scattered, but hundreds, covering every inch of the interior. Deep gouges carved into the wood, the kind made by fingers dragged again and again in desperation. The bones told the same story, fingers fractured, nails broken off at the bed, arms bent upward as if clawing for air. I've seen collapse. I've seen what pressure does, what water damage can mimic. But this wasn't collapse, this was struggle. The officer overseeing the job leaned in, pale as the dead weed uncovered. His photographer snapped pictures, the flash bursting against the jagged lines. The silence among us was heavier than the soil above. No one made a joke, no one moved closer than they had to. And then I saw it, tucked beneath the skeleton's arm, a small wooden box, no bigger than a Bible. I lifted it out with gloved hands, the wood soft but intact. Inside were trinkets, each one wrapped carefully in cloth, a rosary, a wedding ring, a child's shoe, impossibly small, and a note, folded and yellowed, but still legible. If anyone finds me, forgive them. I was not ready to go. The words were shaky, desperate, the ink blurred from damp. My chest tightened as I read. The family later swore they knew nothing about it, said she'd been declared dead at home, a sudden illness, the doctor signing the certificate without question. No one suspected otherwise. But the coffin told another story. We resealed it after documentation, lowered it back, covered it with earth as though nothing had happened. To anyone passing, it was just another stone among many, a name worn by time, a date marking the end of a life. But I knew the truth. She hadn't ended there. She'd fought, she'd begged through scratches and broken fingers, and she'd carried her last words with her, buried in silence no one was meant to break. That night, I lay awake, listening to the scrape of fingernails in my head, over and over. I imagined the darkness, the weight of soil pressing down, the air running thin. I imagined her chest rising in panic, her hands clawing until her bones gave way. Most people think cemeteries are quiet, peaceful. They're not. They're filled with voices that never got to finish speaking, with stories sealed in wood and stone. And sometimes, when you open the ground, those voices find a way out. I still see those scratches when I close my eyes. I still hear the faint rattle when the coffin touched timbers, and every time I pass her section of the cemetery, I feel her there, not resting, not at peace, but waiting in silence. Her story carved into wood, her last words folded in a box no one was ever supposed to read. And I've learned this: the dead don't always lie quietly. Sometimes the earth hides screams, waiting for someone with a shovel to set them loose. Most jobs blur together. Dirt, stone, sweat. You dig, you lift, you reseal, you move on. That's the rhythm of a gravedigger's life. But every once in a while, the ground gives back something it was never supposed to, and that's when the silence of a cemetery feels like it has teeth. This case was supposed to be straightforward. The family wanted their grandfather moved from the old cemetery into a newer one, closer to where most of them lived now. The paperwork was in order, permit signed, witnesses listed, map confirmed. I've learned never to start without triple checking, because every grave is a promise. Break it, and you answer to the living, not the dead. We arrived early. The grass was slick with dew, headstones leaning like crooked sentinels. The section was from the 1920s, older vaults and weather-worn angels watching from their perches. The backhoe stripped the first layers of soil, then it was handwork, careful and deliberate. My shovel rang against the vault after hours of digging, a hollow scrape that carried further than it should have. The concrete looked intact, but wrong somehow. It was too clean. No cracks, no weathering, almost as if it had been sealed yesterday. The officer leaned down, ran his fingers across the surface, frowned, but the map was clear. The headstone matched. This was the right grave. We lifted the lid with a crane, dirt sliding off its edges. Inside was the coffin, wood dark but not rotten. The clasps were free of rust, too polished for decades underground. My gut twisted, but I forced my hands steady as I unlatched them. When we lifted the lid, the air that rushed out was cold, not stale, cold, like a breath drawn in winter. Inside lay the body, but not bones, not decay. A man, whole, his skin pale but his suit crisp, his hands folded neatly across his chest, his hair combed, his shoes polished. He looked asleep, perfectly preserved, like the day he was laid to rest had been only hours ago. We all stepped back. I heard one of the crew mutter a prayer under his breath. Preservation happens, sure chemistry, soil, embalming fluids, but not like this. Not flawless, not untouched by nearly a century. The officer signaled for photographs, his own face pale as chalk. The flash lit the coffin, and that's when I saw it. His eyes. They were open, not clouded, not sunken, not ruined by time. Wide, glassy, fixed on the lid above him. I wanted to tell myself it was embalming, that someone had placed glass eyes in the sockets, a mortician's trick. But when the photographer leaned in close, the flash caught moisture glistening at the corners, as though the eyes themselves had never dried. The silence was unbearable. No one spoke, no one moved, and then, faint and low, I heard it, a sound I pray I'll never hear again. A breath, slow, shallow, rattling through a throat that hadn't seen air in almost 100 years. My chest seized. The younger men stumbled back, swearing. The officer barked at us to stay calm, but his own hands shook. We stood frozen, waiting, listening, the silence broken only by that impossible rasp of air. I reached down, against every instinct screaming at me to stop, and touched his folded hand. It was warm, not the warmth of flesh alive and blood flowing, but not cold either. A stagnant, clinging warmth that clung to my glove long after I pulled away. The officer ordered the coffin resealed immediately, said it wasn't our place to question, that the medical examiner would explain, but none of us believed that. We lowered him back into the vault, sealed the lid, covered the grave as though nothing had been disturbed. On the surface, the cemetery looked the same, stones leaning, grass wet with rain, but underneath, I knew he was there, eyes open, lungs rasping in silence no one dared acknowledge. That night, I dreamed of him. I dreamed of standing in the graveyard alone, hearing shallow breaths rising from the ground around me, dozens of coffins sighing in unison. I woke, gasping, dirt under my nails, the phantom weight of his hand still pressing against my palm. I never told the family what I saw. They were told the remains were preserved, relocated, reburied. That's the story on paper. That's the version the living can accept. But the truth is, he wasn't preserved. He wasn't gone. He was waiting, eyes fixed on the dark above, breathing still. And I've never looked at a cemetery the same way since. People think those fields are quiet, peaceful, but they're not. They're listening. They're breathing. Sometimes, if you're unlucky enough to dig deep enough, the ground breathes back. I've dug enough graves to know what to expect. Soil fights you, vaults crack, coffins collapse, and the dead return to dust. That's the rhythm, that's the comfort even. Because when the pattern holds, you can keep the work mechanical. You don't think too hard about what's under your boots. But one job broke that rhythm, and I haven't walked through a cemetery the same way since. It was a court order, nothing unusual on paper. The family wanted the remains moved from an older section of the cemetery, one of those parts where the stones lean like weary men and moss eats away at names. The paperwork was tight: plot number, burial date, witnesses, a burial from 1961, untouched for decades. We arrived early, backhoe humming low, coffee barely cooling in the truck. The digging started easy, soft topsoil giving way to heavier clay. But the deeper we went, the more the silence pressed in. No one on the crew spoke much. It wasn't just respected, it was the kind of hush that feels imposed, like the air itself is warning you to keep quiet. When the shovel struck the vault, the sound was off, too hollow, almost metallic. We cleared it and lifted the lid with the crane. The coffin inside was wrong, not just worn or collapsed wrong. The wood looked darker than rot, blackened as though scorched, but the vault showed no signs of fire. Its clasps gleamed like they'd been polished. I told myself it was just soil chemistry, but my gut said otherwise. We set it on timbers, and as I bent to open it, I noticed the hinges. They weren't corroded, they were new, too new. I paused, checked the paperwork again, but the dates matched. This coffin had been underground 60 years. It should have been dust. Yet here it was, sealed tight like it had been buried yesterday. I forced the clasps. The lid came up smooth, almost eager, and that's when the cold hit me. Not damp, not stale. Cold, like stepping into a cellar where no warmth ever lived. Inside was the body, or what should have been a body. Instead, there was a figure, skin stretched pale, not skeletal, not rotted. Her hair lay in dark waves across the pillow, her dress white as snow, untouched by soil or time. Her lips were faintly parted, as if she'd been caught mid-breath. The crew behind me shifted, muttering. The officer leaned in, pale as chalk, and then the smell hit. Not decay, not embalming fluid. Sweet, sickly sweet, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. I gagged, pulled back, but I couldn't take my eyes off her face. That's when I saw her chest. It moved. A slow rise, a fall. Too shallow to be real, too deliberate to be accident. I heard one of the younger men whisper, "She's breathing." Nobody corrected him, because we all saw it. The officer barked orders, voice cracking. The photographer clicked flash after flash, but his hands trembled so badly the light shook across her face, and in those bursts of light her eyes flickered. Not open, not shut, just a twitch, a shift under lids that should have been still for half a century. The silence broke when something slipped from her folded hands, a bundle of paper, brittle but intact. I lifted it with shaking gloves. Letters, bound with ribbon, each one addressed the same way, to the one who finds me. We didn't open them then. It wasn't our place. But the words on the outside were enough to chill me worse than the body itself. I was not dead. They put me here anyway. The officer snapped at us to reseal everything. Said it was for the coroner. Said the court would handle it. But I saw his face, he didn't believe his own words. We lowered the coffin back, covered the vault, sealed the soil as though nothing had happened. To anyone walking past, it was just another grave. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake hearing that shallow breath, over and over, imagining the darkness she'd endured. Was she buried alive, preserved by some chemical accident? Or was it something worse, something that never let her die at all? The letters were taken into evidence, locked away somewhere I'll never see, but I think about them constantly. What truths were scratched onto those pages? Pleas, curses, a warning. I'll never know. None of us will. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that when I walk through that part of the cemetery now, I feel the air colder, heavier, as though she's still down there waiting, chest rising and falling beneath tons of soil, her letters sealed tight against her hands. Most people think graves hold silence. They don't. They hold stories, some peaceful, some bitter, and some clawing for breath long after they should have ended. And the earth, patient as it is, doesn't keep secrets forever. Sometimes it lets them out, just enough to remind us that not every burial is what it seems. I've carried that truth with me since that day. When you open the earth, you don't just find the dead. Sometimes you find something that was never allowed to die, and once you've seen that, you never close your eyes in the dark the same way again. Thank you all for joining me on these journeys. Your support means everything, and I love reading your reactions and personal experiences in the comments. If these stories kept you on the edge of your seat or gave you chills, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more haunting stories. Have you ever experienced something similar, or perhaps you have your own unexplainable story to share? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Each of your stories adds another layer to our growing community of horror enthusiasts, and if you think someone else might enjoy a good scare, don't forget to share this video with them. Stay tuned for more spine-chilling stories. And remember, sometimes the scariest tales are the ones that could happen to any of us. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, if you dare.